This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello everyone, you're listening to the Monday Morning Break. I'm your host Kando Kutik, and today we are talking about instructional design. My guest is Rory Brettel, an instructional designer based in Germany.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the show. If you're listening live, we're glad to have you with us. Now, as I was planning for today's show, I wondered what topics would be suitable at this time of the year, having had a series with educators from international schools. I wanted to explore something else that was relevant to our work as teachers. And this time of the year, we're in middle of August, we're at the end of August, and lots of people are back at school in many parts of the world. I know there are some parts of the world where people don't go back or people don't start till January or April, but a lot of people I know go back in August. So I was thinking, since this is the beginning of the school year for many people, I thought a good topic to talk about would be instructional design. And with me today, I have Rory Brettel, who's based in Germany and has been involved in instructional design for the last few years. So Rory, welcome. Say hello first.
Thank you, Kandok, and thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
I'm glad you made it. It's excellent. Excellent. Sound quality is excellent. It's good to have you with us.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking the time. I mean, our time, midday in Germany, it's, middle of the workday for many people. So thank you for taking the time
That's right,
to be
no
with
problem.
us.
It's a real pleasure.
I'm really excited about today's show, especially since I myself have done a course on instructional design, and I had even, as I said to you briefly before, considered doing an MA in this. But first of all, Rory, it's Monday. How has Monday been to you? How are you today?
It's good so far. It's a really nice Monday, so it's a nice start into the week.
Yeah, we've had a couple of hot days here in Germany, but I hear it's not going to be so hot today, and I mean, sun is shining. What else do you want? Okay, tell us a little about yourself. In a previous life, you were an English teacher, right? And then?
Yeah, I came to Germany in 2004, and I started working in the English language training industry in the summer of that year. I teach adults, and so I got a job in a language school in Düsseldorf, and it was off-the-shelf teaching. So we just had to pull a folder off a shelf, and everything was provided for us. It was very easy, and I think I did that for a year, and then I realized that I had some knowledge gaps. So I went to Berlin and did a CELTA course, which is a certification for teaching English to adults.
Okay, so you came first as an unqualified teacher. I mean, we do have a demand for people with good communication skills. That's what the adult education market is like here. So you did that the other way around. You came taught, and then you like it, and you want to do a better job, and you went and you got yourself qualified, but you didn't stay in teaching. You moved on to do, well, now you're an instructional designer.
Yeah, I mean, after I finished the CELTA, I started doing also a little bit of freelancing. So I did I did some in-company teaching, and I also did some academic type teaching at university levels. I was teaching
Mm-hmm.
students of business English, business administration students.
Right.
So I got a bit of experience in that field, and that was what led me to exploring instructional design. Because, and I mean, after doing the CELTA, they didn't talk about material creation or anything like that during the CELTA. There was no information about corporate teaching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that sort of expanded my tasks. So I had to think about then how courses are structured and delivered.
Right.
Um,
Right. So then I'm going to just jump in here because I can imagine somebody might just say, okay, well, I understand what you mean that, in a lot of initial teacher training programs for EFL, English as a foreign language, we're taught, somebody told me that what we get the tools to survive our first years of teaching, and where you take it after that, it's up to you. And what you've done then, some people might say, well, that's just materials design. That's just
mm.
writing your own syllabus. Now, it's not, because it's more than that. What does it entail really, Rory?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you, with the expression materials writer seems very narrow to me. And so, like, obviously, if you're creating a course, you're involved in things like course planning. It could be from the very beginning. So it could be from, creating the business case for the course, you know, analyzing the data that you have available, and then designing the course, creating the course, teaching the course, and then finally evaluating the success of your course. So that's a lot more than just materials design. So I think materials design for me is something very narrow, where
Mm-hmm.
what you actually do as a corporate trainer is a lot wider. Yeah.
Right. And not just in corporate training. I mean, if, let's say, like you mentioned, working at university, right? And that's my background as well.
Mm.
I teach at university, I teach English at university, and you get given a course, and a lot of the time there's no, one textbook that would, you know, be suited for that class. So you'd have to think, like what you say, you'd have to, think about your learners, think about what they need, and then, devise the course, source your materials. So that's also somebody would say, okay, well, then you're just doing a needs analysis and writing a syllabus. It's not very complex.
Uh, yeah, I mean that in the sort of TEFL world, people often talk about needs analysis, but I mean, you're right. It's much more expansive than that, because you have to look at what kind of data you have available. Um, I think for a university course, it's probably easier in the sense that these are pre-service learners. So usually you create a course around the syllabus that the students are learning, so around the other topics. So it's probably um, easier to design in that sense than if you go into a corporate environment and are doing corporate training. But
Hmm.
for me, I think instructional design theory was very useful because it introduced me to the idea of models like ADDIE, for example, which is breaking the course down into very linear stages. So you have it's an acronym for analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So you look at all of these stages very closely individually, and that helped me a lot align courses with learners' needs. And I think that's applicable in a lot of different settings, in the university setting, in the corporate setting.
I
Yeah.
mean, it helps you, definitely. It helps you as a teacher. And would you agree that, well, would, would you agree that knowledge of instructional design is important to teachers at all levels. I mean, there will be teachers who say, like we have teachers in compulsory schooling, right, in primary up to secondary education, who would say, well, that's not really important for us because we get the students we get. We don't really have much of a say in who we teach, and we have our syllabus and we have our set textbooks. So let why should I care? Why should I think about how I do things, or much more about my learners? What would you say to somebody like that who felt that instructional design wasn't something that would be relevant in any way to them?
I think that's a good question. I think instructional design gives a trainer a more complete picture of learning theories. Because if you're studying instructional design, you will learn a lot about things like the cognitive processes, scaffolding theory, behaviorism. So it's a very, I would say, broad approach to learning theories where when I did the CELTA, for example, that was fairly narrow. We never really talked about Brunner or Vygotsky or any of these theories. So I think as a teacher, if you have those in your head, things start to make sense. You have those kind of light bulb moments when you realize, okay, that's why it's like this in the course book. You understand the
Mm-hmm,
tapering off process of scaffolding, that, you're giving the student more independence. And you start to see
mm-hmm.
the logic behind self-paced learning elements, which you might not have seen.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Go ahead.
I think it just gives you a wider range of tools as well. Um, Also, like, when it comes to things like technology integration, because through instructional design, you learn about learning management systems like Moodle. Um, and I think that's very important for a lot of trainers to learn about that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it's while they may not necessarily be involved in the entirety of instructional design and all that's included in it, what you're saying is that if they have an understanding of instructional design, a syllabus might make more sense to them, or they may be able to be more flexible to adapt or change the way they teach, change teaching strategies, adapt teaching strategies to the learners that they have, right, to their audience. So it's not just going in at the beginning of school year with your curriculum or with your syllabus and saying, okay, this is what I've got to cover for the next 15 weeks, and that's it. I'm going to do that. So that's what you're saying, is that instructional
Yeah.
design is really a lot deeper. Um,
Yeah.
Now, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it gives the trainers the tools to do that. And it also, you will understand principles like cognitive load. So you will be able to optimize the way you design materials. So you, for example, cognitive load theory will teach you that it's bad to put extraneous information on exercises. It'll teach you why it's very important to make your instructions very, very clear, and so the quality of your materials will go up. I think that's a key point.
And I mean, even if you weren't writing your own material, say if you were somebody working on a syllabus, understanding that theory, if you were
Mm.
in school or any other language classroom, understanding that theory will also help you understand why the syllabus is the way it is. There are teachers, for example, or my teacher trainees, for example, don't really understand why I tell them that, when you're giving instructions, less is more, right? And we've done an exercise, we did an exercise in one of our classes where I'd given them a sample instruction that had been transcribed from somebody giving an instruction, and there was just a lot of information, was very confusing, and they had to look at it and discuss what was wrong with it, what could be done better. And so obviously some of the feedback that they'd given was that, oh, the teacher's confusing. Follow-up question we asked was, why is the teacher confusing? Oh, well, there's so many things that they're asking the students to do at one time, and so on, right? And
Yeah.
the students in this class, right, have to write a reflection at the end of the course. And one thing that many students wrote in their reflection was that one that they learned, or one of the most memorable things that they learned that stayed with them, was that they shouldn't overload their instructions. And I mean, we think, as experienced teachers, we think, well, that's just so obvious, right? But it's interesting to see how something like this isn't obvious to everybody,
Yeah.
or even when you're teaching grammar and you decide, oh, I'll teach present simple and present progressive at the same time, which, depending on the level of your students, may
Yeah.
not be suitable.
And in my current job, I work as an editor, so I made the transition to material creation and editing. And it's I think it's very similar because I work with a team of a couple of writers. And for example, if in the editing process, if I'm shortening an instruction, it's quite important that that edit is then justified. And so by exchanging information about instructional design and these things like cognitive load, it makes the editing process quite easy, I think, because people then understand exactly why you're changing their instruction. And there's never any disputes about, making an edit to someone's lesson. And another, I think, interesting aspect of instructional design is, multimedia design and these principles. I think you've heard of Mayer's 12 principles of multimedia design. So that,
No, no, tell us, tell
yeah,
us.
yeah, that they relate really to the actual design and layout, but they're also a bit interlinked with, let's say, cognitive load theory. So this idea that you want to avoid extraneous load in an exercise. So the first Mayer principle is coherence principle, that it's important to remove anything that's extraneous to the actual exercise to avoid distractions. So you go for a more minimalistic approach. So you leave space around the exercise and you don't overcrowd it with irrelevant information. And he also has other interesting principles like the spatial contiguity principle, which says that we should place text and visuals closer together, and the temporal contiguity principle, which says that you should present corresponding words and visuals simultaneously. There shouldn't be a delay. So these are just kind of like best practices for designing content.
And applicable to every teacher, really. I mean, it's not something that one would say, well, that's just the job of the instructional designer, or the material. That's the job of the materials designer. So
Yeah.
it's things like that. They're applicable to every teacher. Now, before we get into what instructional design is, here is this week's education news. We'll be right back.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Media outlets across England, Wales and Northern Ireland have covered GCSE and other Level 2 results in detail. Many stories highlighted the fact that Year 11 pupils receiving results this summer started Year 7 in September 2019, but were in lockdown before the first year of secondary school had ended, with the BBC describing the cohort as unique. Many stories focused on the GCSE pass rate, which has fallen for a third year running, back in line with 2019 levels. The drop was steepest in Northern Ireland, followed by Wales. In England, the plan was to bring grades back in line last year, but they remained a little higher. The regional divide continues to grow in England. London continues to be the highest performing region, with 72.5% of entries marked at grade 4 or above, compared to the 63.1% in the West Midlands. The gap is up from 8.7 last year to 9.4 percentage points. It seems the pre-COVID north-south divide is continuing. 4 out of 5 regions in the North and Midlands had a lower pass rate this year than in 2019. But in every region in the south it has risen. Many have commented that long-term disadvantages within some regions are to blame. MPs warned last year that it could take a decade for the gap between disadvantaged pupils and others to narrow to pre-pandemic levels. Resits are also set to rise for both English language and maths. This is because the pass rate is slightly worse, but the 16-year-old population has grown since the pandemic, so more places on courses to resit will be needed. Colleges have previously said they had increased class sizes due to population growth and grade boundary changes, but will now need to prepare for even more. This has prompted some to question whether the compulsory resit approach is still appropriate. Full details of the results analysis can be found on the BBC, TES and other education news websites. In Australia, the right to disconnect is coming into force. It gives employees the power to not respond to out-of-hours contact from their employer without suffering consequences. This has prompted some to consider the impact this could have on schools. While some legitimate out-of-hours activities have to take place, residential trips, visits and sport, etc., teacher unions have argued that staff should not be permanently on call. They have particularly focused on parent and student contact with teachers, especially via email, and the expected response times, which should be in place in order to protect work-life balance. The news from Australia has prompted fresh debate on social media regarding workload for teachers in many countries, use of emails, and the recruitment and retention crisis in the UK. The Guardian focuses on the story of a group of trainee female doctors from Afghanistan who have travelled to Edinburgh to complete their medical degrees after the Taliban forced them to quit. The 19 women arrived in the UK last week after a 3-year campaign by the parents of Linda Norgrove, the kidnapped Scottish charity worker who was killed during a rescue attempt by US Special Forces in 2010. A foundation set up by her parents worked with UK and Scottish officials to arrange safe passage and student visas. They have been given places at 4 medical schools after Scottish ministers changed the law to treat them as home students, eligible for free tuition. One of the women arriving said, "Our journey here will be long, 8 or 9 years. I think during this time many alterations and changes will come to Afghanistan. I am hopeful the situation won't remain the same." Finally, a primary school in Orkney has welcomed a new, unusual intake of pupils. According to the story on the BBC News website, the new class is made up entirely of boys. The rare occurrence is a first for the P1 class teachers, but the situation doesn't seem to bother the boys themselves, with one of the 18 saying the class was good without girls. The school is making sure that the boys will still have the opportunity to interact with girls outside the classroom, but that the boys' only class was really special and something they're going to remember forever. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
So, we are back for the second part of our conversation. Hello again. Welcome to everybody who's joined us in the interim. As a reminder, we're talking about instructional design today. I've got Rory Bredel, who has a background in English language teaching, works in adult education, and is now predominantly or mainly an instructional designer. So let's backtrack a little. What then if you're in an elevator, you're giving an elevator speech, and somebody said to you, Rory, what exactly is instructional design?
Okay, that's a good question because it's such a broad area. But I would say, like we have said, it's much broader than just focusing on a single learning object like exercise or a worksheet. It covers really the entire learning experience. So from the business case where you set up the course commercially to the evaluation of the course. So there's a lot of steps in there. And it's not limited to something like language training. Language training is a niche of instructional design. So it really could cover any learning experience. You could be teaching people leadership skills. It could be any topic.
Could also be professional development for teachers, could be an extracurricular class for students with high IQ, right? Something
Yeah,
about IT. So would I be right in understanding that materials design falls within or is part of instructional design, or developing your learning management system, developing online learning materials? That's all part of instructional design.
yeah. I would say that it belongs inside of instructional design. And if we look at the AGI framework, which is the first step is analyze, then design and develop. I mean, a very limited view of materials design would just be design and develop. And the other steps, analyze, implement, and evaluate, could be done by another person, so other stakeholders. So yeah, materials writing could be just seen as something very narrow inside of it.
You had mentioned earlier some of the things, or part of the instructional design process would be, analyzing your data being, your audience, right? Who's involved, who are the learners, who's the audience in this learning activity. That was one stage. What kind of things do you look at in terms of understanding your learners? What information about your learners is important to the next step, to course design?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to look at as much data as you can get. So you're going to look at, what courses your learners are taking at that moment. So this will help you then focus on areas which you can see you can get the most leverage from. So statistically, what are the main focus areas of one cohort of learners? And I think you would also look at other data, like you could get data from your sales process. What content you're actually selling if you're a language school. You will look at data like completion rates. So which courses your students have actually completed and which not.
Okay, that's interesting.
You look at assessment results because you'll want to know which levels are the most popular levels. So you should always develop the levels which will be used the most first. That makes commercial sense. Yeah. So I think those would be the main sources of information. And you'll also have to consider, are you iterating a course that already exists? In that case, you would look at the trainer feedback that's available about the course and possibly student feedback if it exists. Or are you looking at a prospective course which doesn't exist, and then you'll have less information to go on.
That's really interesting when you describe it like that, because I'm picturing so many scenarios, so many different learning environments where that could work. From in compulsory education, say if what we have in Germany, we still have in some schools, is language support classes for students of non-German L1 background. So my younger child had one of those, but and that's the kind of course where the students come in with such different levels. They're different ages. You have them also in secondary schools when we have children from abroad who've come to live here. So that's what the teacher would want to look at. What assessment they've done, where they're going, what courses they've already done. That's really, really, really relevant at all levels. What's the next step then?
I mean, the next step would be to take all that data, and then you would need to kind of consolidate the data you have and then draw conclusions from it about what topics you're going to develop, on what levels you're going to choose first to develop. You'll need to look at, for example, the age group of your students, because materials will be different for different age groups. So I think what you're doing is you're drawing the critical information. You're sort of prioritizing what data is the most useful, and then you're informing the design process. So you're going to make a course. You're going to make a course plan for your course, where you describe the objectives of the course, the objectives of each of the lessons. You possibly, if it's a language course, you'll make can-do statements for every lesson. And then otherwise you will then, in addition to that, you will need to create some kind of project management tool, like a tracking sheet. So
Right. And that would all connect, sorry to interrupt, but that would all also connect to the information that you get about your learners, for instance, in terms of how much time they have, right, to complete the course. So let's say if you had somebody who was starting school in Germany, in primary school, they'd have a longer time to develop their knowledge of German for schooling. Or if you had somebody, I had a lot of teachers recently who were working in international schools. So each of their learners would have, different amounts of time with which they could, with which they had to achieve that level of language proficiency. And you'd have the same at university, where students may only have 15 weeks to develop, their presentation skills or academic writing skills.
yeah, exactly. So that'll have a strong influence over what you're going to put in the course, because obviously you can't overload a module with too much information. So you have to be very sensitive about how much you put in. I think a very common mistake is to be over ambitious and try to cram too much into a course.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go back and look at my own course design. I make the mistake, quintessential, typical mistake. We have 15 weeks in our term, and I just think I need to teach them everything, to get everything in the course, and I see it every week. And at the end of every semester, I tell myself that's too much again, and the cognitive overload is just too much for the students. And one thing I remember from my initial foray into instructional design course was also not only how much time they have with you in face-to-face learning, but how much time they're able to dedicate for that out of class learning, and that
Yeah,
also makes a difference.
yeah. People's previous educational experiences come into play there. So it depends. If you have people from different cultures, certainly, I've had students from Russia and Poland and places, and they're much more open to a greater quantity of content than say somebody from Germany would be, or the UK. So they have a different expectations. You're dealing with the learner's expectations of how much material they feel is appropriate. I personally think that everybody tends to put too much into an activity. And that's why it's very important to have someone to look at materials that you've created and say to you, oh, I think that's too much. It's a natural tendency of people to do that.
Why do you think we do that though? I mean, my reason for doing it is because I think, so I've got my various different classes, and I just think they need to know all this. And in my case, it really is just the case that they only have this one class. So my students have just one academic writing class. They have one, communication skills for teachers class. They have one grammar class. And I just think
Yeah,
I need to give them all that. I
yeah,
just feel that time is against me.
yeah. I think the one point is that we, as teachers and writers, we understand the topics and the points. And if we put them into an exercise, we're not looking at them from the learner perspective, which is they don't understand these points and these topics. And that's why I think sometimes if I write something and I give it to another person, they will look at it from their own perspective, and they'll become aware that there's too much in that task. And that's something that I personally wouldn't have noticed, because for me, I understand everything that I've written there. I understand my own instruction. And so that's why I think it's essential to have an editor when you're making materials.
So we talked about Eddie. So A for analyze, D for design. What's the next D?
The next stage then is develop, which is the actual process of creating the content. So that's where you're working on your tracking sheet. You have your different tasks in the tracking sheet, which one would be like to create, and then you'll have an editing task, which is like a quality analysis of what's being created. And then there could be also, I mean, in the context that I'm in, we also design the material. So we have another person who's going to come in and design the
So like
lesson.
worksheets, the input, and things like that.
Yeah, the photos and the layout.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm creating materials for online usage, so they have to be slides that can be presented in an online classroom. And we do quality control after that as well. So there's quite a lot of different steps in the develop process.
Okay.
Back in the day when I was a teacher, I used to just create things and then use them in the class. And often either the students would respond very well and you'd know that's a great lesson, you'd put it in your folder of good lessons, or the response would be kind of a bit muted, and then you would know that was something not good about it and you'd have to go and change it. So that was a different way of doing developing lessons, I think.
And I suppose that the difference also is it's something that I'm experiencing at university is that if you're working outside of compulsory education, you don't usually work in a team. So freelance teachers, I know that freelance teachers in Germany or in language schools, private language schools in different parts of the world, they are the teacher of their own class and they do their own thing, right? So if you
Yeah,
create materials or source materials and use them in class, like you say, the only person who would give you feedback on it would be your students. And it's the same for me at university. Either people are just too busy, to look over your work if you're asking for somebody to just take a quick look at what you've created, or people just feel, I don't know, it's I think it's quite a lonely job if you're teaching English outside of the public school system. So you don't have that quality control. You're going straight to implementation, right? Which is the I in EDI.
Yeah.
So implement means putting it to use. Do you, is there a process? I mean, we don't have it when we as teachers create our own course and teach it, but as an instructional designer, in your team, is there a process where it's trial, the material or the course is trialed, or do you just, and would that be part of development, or do you just go straight to implementation with whoever's taking the course?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also another model which is more iterative. So, I prefer a more iterative model where you make a prototype and then you would give that prototype to somebody who's responsible for teaching, who would review that, and then you would implement the design changes that are necessary. So it's a little bit more iterative. Um, that will get
That
a
would
lot
be in
more
an ideal,
success.
that would be in an ideal world if we all had, somebody all the time to have that, that
Yeah,
person look it over, or but that, those are ideals. I think for many teachers, those are, ideals to have, to hope, to wish for.
yeah,
And then we have E, which is evaluate. Is
yeah.
that correct? How does that work?
Well, evaluation will be mainly trainers who evaluate content or students. Most of the data tends to come from trainers because trainers are asked to evaluate materials, whereas students generally, it could be one point on some kind of evaluation questionnaire they have, and it's usually not very specific. So it's difficult to get very granular, useful feedback from students. It also, I think, the challenge of getting feedback from trainers is that they're very busy, and they're often teaching back to back. And so sometimes they're less reluctant to give evaluation unless it's something they really don't like. So they're motivated in a negative sense and not in a positive sense. So you might just get a comment like, "Oh, this is old-fashioned," but how you work with that information then is that's difficult, because with a comment like that, it's not so easy. Yeah, so you have to set up very specific evaluation criteria and questionnaires.
When you set up your questionnaires, would you be setting them up with specific things that you want to know about? Like, would you have rubrics, or do you have just different questionnaires, different evaluation methods for different courses?
I would be inclined to use a rubric because you would want to know, for example, whether there was any or too much cognitive load in an exercise, and you'd have to have a specific question to ask whether the trainer thought that the quantity of information was appropriate for the level. So it would have to be specific. So specific questions.
So you've never actually, you know, from the whole EDI process up to implement, you actually have that particular course, those particular materials on your radar for a while,
Yeah.
for a
Well,
while.
in the context I'm in at the moment, the evaluation process is not done by me personally. So that would be done by the person who's responsible for organizing the training. So they would do the training evaluation. And the goal is to enhance that process and then align very closely with that person. And so I think the role of an instructional designer is often to bring the important stakeholders together and get them to align on these things, because you're never going to do it all on your own. It's really going to be a collaborative thing.
And it's not realistic to do it on your own. Anyway, um,
Mm.
before we go on, I'd like to ask you about some of the challenges that you see in your work. In terms of what you do, who you do it for, audience, whether people you work with are qualified or not, and AI. There's a lot of people who say, "Well, we've got AI now. They can do it all for us." What?
Yeah,
Yeah. What do
yeah.
you think?
I mean, I think it's a very interesting question to ask about the challenges. I think one of the big challenges is actually to develop the right content. Yeah, it's very important to follow all these steps very carefully, because if you develop the wrong content, you could be, from a commercial point of view, it's a disaster, because content development is very expensive. And so the challenge is to get it right, invest the money, and then if you've done everything correctly, you will get a return on that investment. Um, so that's a significant challenge. And sometimes the collection of data is hard, because you're going to have to rely on other stakeholders. So you're relying on sales to collect good information about, what is the demand for a certain language course at the moment. What ESP topics are companies interested in. Um, so if you don't have this data, then it's difficult to make informed decisions. And that can lead then to the incorrect decision being made. Obviously, that's not something you want to see happen.
No, no, definitely not. Before we talk about AI, we have some messages again,
Mm,
and then we'll be right back.
This
okay.
show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
So, AI. So, what you were saying earlier, Rory, is one of the challenges is having the right content, getting the correct information from other stakeholders about what they want, in a course. If we come back to content, there'll be people who would say, "Well, AI can do it all for me." We've seen on social media people saying, "I just put in the level of my learners, the topic, and whatnot, and then wham bam, I've got a lesson that has been produced but for me, all set, and I don't have to do anything." What you say to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that generative AI is really going to be disruptive in the industry, because it's going to be much quicker for people to customize materials, and the expectations of customers will change as well. It's just been so quick, this development in the last 2 years, and we see an awful lot of tools, really good tools, that are sort of piggybacking on ChatGPT, that they use an API and they're customized to create materials for language classes, and they're doing a really, really good job at it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, though, that you can't replace the content writer in this process, because I think, for me, a lot of what AI produces, it's very, you can recognize that it's AI. It's lacking in emotion and fun element. And a lot of material writers will tell you that that's really important, that the students can relate or they can learn a lot more from materials when they have some, emotional stimulus from something. So I feel that that's lacking. I find that AI creates materials that are often very similar. They have a certain very high density type sentence where the words have a lot of syllables. There's a lot of complex words in the sentence. So I think it can be very useful to assist the materials writer, but you still need a writer to edit the content, change it. So it can speed up their work, but I don't see it as something that can replace them completely.
And I mean, to come back on what you said about language as well, I think, a B2 learner of English in Germany, for example, may not necessarily have the same lexical knowledge, say, as a B2 learner of English somewhere else, like in Japan,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, these levels, they're just descriptors of what you can do, what a language learner can do. For example, I can talk on my work, I can give simple presentations, but depending on if they've had personalized lessons, or we have textbooks that are based in Europe that cover certain topics that are not covered, let's say, in other parts of the world. So AI, like you say, it's the material, the language is generic, may not suit the human element, is not there.
Mm.
And I think that there's a difference when you've created materials or you were involved in the creation process and you go and use the materials versus you've given generative AI some instructions of what you want and it produces something for you because
Mm.
you've not been involved in it. Um, on that note, I think what you've actually described of the whole, process involved in terms for, in instructional design, I it sounds very similar to what teachers that I've spoken to, the educators who work with young people, teaching them, English as an additional language for their studies. It's very much a similar process. They do the analysis. It's not one teacher who does the whole process. They get the data from stakeholders or from admissions officers who've done language tests with them.
Mm.
They look at the student needs, ages of the students, educational background, and then they develop material. They work as a team. They produce content, develop content. They edit it, copy edit, check, use it,
Mm.
evaluate, and then rinse and repeat the following school year. So it's not, you know we can't say, and we shouldn't say, that instructional design isn't relevant to school teachers or university teachers. We all do it. Rory, a couple of things that you love about your work, having made the transition from language teacher to full-time instructional designer and now content writer.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to kind of see a course through from the initial concept stage to actually have to creating it and then seeing the results of that creation, seeing all the lessons. And then obviously it's a real bonus if you get positive feedback from trainers. And so I enjoy kind of directing this process and doing some of the project management tasks to make that happen. Um, Another real highlight of my work is the collaboration with my team, because for me, I think it's together that we've really, we reach at the best possible outcomes. And I work with, talented material writers and designers. So it's been a very two-way process for me, and I think I've learned a lot doing that sort of collective knowledge and sharing. Um, and so, what I've learned about instructional design, I've been able to share with the people I'm working with, and they've shared things that they've learned. It's been a very collaborative process.
Have you ever designed something or been, involved in the design process for something where you then thought, after it was completed, like, oh no, I really hope this works. I really, really hope this works. And then, because you were really unsure about it, and then got just amazing feedback that really surprised you. Have you ever
Yeah,
been in that situation?
yeah. I think you're going to be in that situation as material writer if you get too distant from classroom practice, because one important thing for me was that I was able to do it because I had classroom experience, so I could kind of understand what would happen in the classroom with certain things. And over a period of time, if you're not doing any training, you could feel that, or maybe unsure about how something could work in the classroom. Um, so yeah, I have felt like that, and yeah,
Yeah, I feel like that all the time, even though I have classes that I've taught, 15 years now, and that feeling never goes away. I get these new students. I don't have the
mm,
advantage of, well, for some courses I have the advantage of knowing who they are, where they're going, where they've
mm,
come from. And in October, every year in October, I get a new cohort of university students, and we don't have that information. That's all, data protection. So we don't have information on where they come from, what their learning experience has been. Some people may have had a good learning experience. Some people may have had an awful learning experience, with learning English. But then you question why they want to come and study English at university.
yeah,
But
yeah,
they're all there, and it's really hard. I think it's really hard. What I say, it's really hard when you're going in blind,
yeah,
and then sometimes I wish I just had more time to
yeah,
do this whole thing, or a bunch of colleagues to work with. Oh,
yeah.
what?
It's. I think working collaboratively makes things easy, but I think it's a challenge that we were talking about needs analysis earlier, but the results of that could be that you know that you have a very diverse group, and then it becomes quite a challenge to create something generic enough that can fit this very diverse group. So you ask, oh, who's going to do this course, and then somebody says to you, well, it's going to be a young person, it's an old person, someone with business experience, someone without business experience. Um, And so then you have to sit and think, okay, what's appropriate for that target group?
Yeah,
And
I had that with this communication class for teachers, right? They're all actually pre-service teachers. They're doing their teacher education degree.
mm,
But like many places in the world, many young people who are studying at university, they have part-time jobs, and a number of my students have worked in schools, or were at the time of the course, working as school assistants or substitute teachers or teacher assistants. So they have had some classroom experience. And even though I had asked for this, they write an opening reflection when they begin their course. So, they mention that, and I have it at the back of my head, and I know at the back of my head that they come in with various different experiences, and some of them come in with no classroom experience at all, I mean, apart from being a learner. And yet, at the end, when I read through these, course reflections, I still have students who've said, things like, yeah, they enjoyed the course, and the materials were nice and everything, but they felt that these were the things that we'd covered, that they knew them already because they had already, had that classroom experience or had been in class. And that for me, you know, that that makes me a little sad because, like you
mm,
say, you develop a course, you want to make it relevant to everybody, and there will be that camp that will say, well, you can't make everybody happy. but
yeah,
but for me, it's not about making everybody happy. It's about making the course relevant for everybody, because it just makes me sad when I read at the end when somebody says, yeah, but I know all this already because I've already been working as a teacher for the
Yeah.
last 6 months.
It's about making a compromise, isn't it, between your target audience in order to find that point where materials will suit that, quite wide group. So I totally agree with you. Yeah, I had that experience as a trainer sometimes when even in the university where I was teaching business administration students, you teach somebody about needs analysis, and one person, we could be doing something like SWOT analysis, and one student would know it completely, and then, they would maybe bored by this, but another person would have never have heard of it. And so it's
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had that with the vocabulary element in that language, communication class that I had, where I had students who had written that they were really bored with all the vocabulary activities we did because, they felt it was too easy and not challenging enough. And at the same time, I've had students in the class that I had observed who were just at a loss for words all the time. They didn't know words like projector or socket or plug and things like that, or band-aid or a plaster or a stapler. Stapler is one that quite a few of them didn't have. But yeah, like you say, it's about finding a compromise, and I think that's what I'm going to take away for me from this show. What's one thing you'd like our listeners, our audience, to take away from this show today? Your message to us.
I would say that do not be afraid of making mistakes with this process, because it's something which you're going to make mistakes and you're going to have to learn from them, because instructional design is quite complex, and naturally mistakes are going to be made, and this can cause difficulties, but I think we can all learn from that and improve what we're doing.
Thank you for that. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, everyone. And that's all. On that note, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us or listening back. If you're listening back to the podcast, Rory, it has been a pleasure having you. Thank you very much. Thank you once again. And everyone, have a good day, a good rest of the week. If you want to listen to more, we have all our shows on ttradio.org/listen back. And we hope to catch you here again. Thanks so much, Rory. Have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you, Kandok. It's a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure
Bye.
talking to you. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.